The desert night was breathing cold across the high plains of Arizona when Jacob Rourke stirred in his bunk. The ranch house usually slept in iron silence, its wooden ribs creaking only when the wind prowled too close. But tonight, something different pressed against the dark. A faint knock. It wasn't the confident hammering of a cowboy seeking shelter, nor the desperate pounding of someone chased by danger. It was timid, soft, almost apologetic. Jacob's hand slid to the Winchester, leaning by the door. He cracked the door. Open to Apache girls no older than 14 stood, barefoot on the frozen dirt, shivering beneath tattered dresses. Their hair was tangled with desert dust, their cheeks raw from cold. One held the other upright. The younger girl's knee was bleeding, wrapped in a strip of cloth already dark with dried blood. Jacob blinked, startled. Apaches rarely came this close to the ranches, and never unarmed. The older girl spoke a single word in broken English. Cold. Jacob hesitated. Every rancher knew the stories of Apache scouts lurking in the dark, using children as bait to test the kindness or fear of settlers. Men who helped them sometimes vanished the next day. Others woke to arrows embedded in their walls. But the girls weren't scouts. They were terrified. Jacob stepped aside. "Come in," he said softly. The fire had nearly died, but he stirred it back to life. The warmth flushed color into the girls' faces. Their trembling hands hovered over the flames, as if it was the first warmth they had felt in days. Jacob fetched the only blanket he owned, a heavy wool Navajo peace-gifted years ago by a trader. It was his shield against winter nights, worth more than the coat on his back. He wrapped it around the two sisters without hesitation. The older girl looked at him with eyes so exhausted they barely held focus. But when the warmth settled over them, she whispered something in Apache. Jacob didn't understand the words, but the look, gratitude mixed with fear, was unmistakable. He tended the younger girl's wound, using clean cloth and warm water. She winced, but didn't pull away. After they ate, the older sister pointed toward the mountains under the dark moon. "Men," she whispered, "many men coming." Jacob's pulse thumped once. Hard Apache warriors. A hunting party, or something worse? He gently asked. "Your tribe?" The girl shook her head. "Enemy of us, enemy of you." Jacob felt the hair rise on his arms. He looked toward the black horizon. The desert wind carried a scent he knew well, dust and motion. Riders, a lot of them. The sisters curled together near the fire, wrapped tight in his only blanket. Their breathing steadied. Sleep pulled them under, but the older girl's last whisper chilled Jacob more than the night wind. "Dawn. They come." Jacob sat beside the fire, rifle across his knees, watching the dark swell over the plains. He didn't know whether he'd rescued the two girls or doomed himself. Dawn arrived slowly, dragging light over the mesas like a dusty curtain. Jacob stepped outside, breath fogging in the cold. The ranch yard looked calm, almost peaceful, but the earth told another story. Fresh tracks, dozens. HOOFPRINTS, bare footprints. Drag marks. He crouched, fingers brushing the impressions. These were recent, no more than a few hours old. Too many for a hunting party, and to spread out for a normal raid. The Apache sisters stood behind him, wrapped in his blanket. The older one pointed at the tracks, her jaw tight. "Coyotero band," she murmured. "Not our people." Jacob had heard rumors. A renegade group that had split from the Chiricahua, fierce, desperate, unpredictable. They raided ranches, towns, even other tribes. Apache against Apache, white against native Vit. They hunted for survival, not territory. But what did they want with two young girls? Jacob guided them back inside. Why are they chasing you? The older sister hesitated. Her eyes filled with a weight far older than her years. They took our mother, our little brother. A shaky breath. We ran. Jacob swallowed a curse. And now they're tracking you. She nodded. They think we tell white men. They kill many for small reasons. You help us. They kill you too. Jacob leaned against the table, rubbing his temples. He lived alone, miles from town. The nearest help was half a day's ride. If the Coyotero band found the girls here, the ranch would burn and anyone inside it would die before the first flames reached the roof. He paced the wooden floor. We need to hide you. Take you to my cellar. They might not search there, but the older girl shook her head. They smell tracks. They track wind. They find anything. Jacob knew she was right. Real Apache trackers could follow a footprint across solid rock. Hiding was a fool's hope. The younger girl tugged on Jacob's sleeve. Horse, she whispered. Run, he exhaled. Maybe, but 3 horses in the barn couldn't outrun a war party of hundreds. Still, he had to choose something. He loaded rifles Winchester, Sharps, Colt revolvers, packing ammunition into a leather satchel. He wasn't planning to fight an army, but he damn well wasn't going to die begging. Then he saw it, the rising dust cloud on the horizon. His heartbeats stopped. The sisters saw it too. Their faces drained. They come, the older girl said softly. Jacob lifted his rifle and stared across the plains. The dust thickened, swelled, turned from a cloud into a wall dot, and then he saw them. Riders, lines of them, hundreds. Their silhouettes shimmered in the heat, rising from the desert floor. 300, the older girl whispered with dread. Jacob wiped sweat from his palms. Why so many for 2 children? Her voice broke. They chase not us alone. They chase anyone in their path. The morning sun rose behind the riders, turning them into shadows on horseback, an army emerging from the light. Jacob steadied his rifle. His heart hammered a steady rhythm, but there was no fear left, only resolve. Girls, he said quietly, stay behind me. No matter what happens. The riders thundered closer, and Jacob Rourke stood alone in the cold light of morning, against 300 Apache warriors. The ground trembled before the riders ever reached the ranch. Jacob felt it through the soles of his boots, a steady thud, 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 like the heartbeat of the desert itself. The Apache sisters clung to the doorway, eyes wide, their fear as thick as the rising dust. 300 warriors. Yet the closer they came, the more Jacob noticed something strange. They weren't charging, they were slowing. The front riders bare-chested, painted for war, hair tied with feathers and strips of cloth reined back their ponies. The wild thunder of hooves softened into a rolling hush. They formed a half-circle around the ranch yard, surrounding Jacob like a tightening noose. Jacob planted his boots in the dirt, rifle down but ready. He wasn't aiming at them. He was simply refusing to move. For a long moment, nothing happened. Dust floated like ghosts between the still horses. The warriors didn't shout, didn't raise weapons. They only watched him. Then one rider stepped forward, a tall Apache with a braided rawhide band across his forehead. His face was painted black from temple to chin, a sign Jacob recognized, or leader. His presence radiated command, the type that didn't require yelling. The warrior's voice cut through the morning air. "Why you stand? You alone." Jacob swallowed. "Because those girls are under my roof. And anyone under my roof gets my protection." The war leader stared at him as if studying an animal he'd never seen before. "You give blanket to them." It wasn't a question. He must have seen the textile wrapped around the sisters. Jacob nodded. They were freezing. The chief's gaze flicked to the girls. The older one stepped forward, trembling, clutching the blanket tight. She spoke quickly in Apache words, spilling out like a dam breaking. Tears streaked her dusty cheeks. Jacob couldn't understand her, but the pain in her voice needed no translation. She told him everything. The chief's face hardened not with anger toward Jacob, but with something deeper. Sorrow. When she finished, the war leader closed his eyes for a moment. The entire warband shifted uneasily, sensing a change in the air. Then the chief turned his horse slightly so the sun lit his face. "Our enemies took her mother," he said in English. "They kill her family, not our doing." Jacob blinked. "Then you're not here to hurt them." The chief straightened. "We track the killers. We follow for many days. Their trail come here, but you protect these girls. You treat them kind, give blanket, fire, food." He paused. "That is not the act of our enemy." Relief washed through Jacob so fast his knees almost buckled. The Apache sisters sagged against the doorway, whispering prayers under their breath. But the moment wasn't safe yet. The chief raised his hand, and every warrior lifted their spears, bows, and rifles skyward in silent acknowledgement, a gesture of respect among Apache bands. "You show honor," the leader said. "More honor than many white men, more than some Apaches too." Jacob exhaled shakily. "I didn't do anything special." The chief's eyes hardened not unkindly, but with the weight of truth. "In this world, a good man is special." A murmur of agreement ran through the warriors. Then the chief guided his pony closer, stopping only a few feet from Jacob. "We take girls to our camp. They safe with us. We find killers. Bring justice. But you," he pointed at Jacob's chest, "you have our respect and our protection." Jacob looked around at the 300 warriors surrounding his ranch. "I appreciate that." The chief extended a hand, a warrior's handshake. Strong, honest, Jacob took it without fear. For the first time since dawn, the desert stopped feeling like a battlefield. The war leader turned to the sisters. "Come, you family now. We ride together." The girls hesitated, looking back at Jacob with gratitude shining in their eyes. Then they ran to him and hugged him tight, the blanket still wrapped around them. The chief raised his arm and shouted a command. In perfect unison, the riders lifted their reins, ready to move. As they began to ride out, Jacob realized something. 300 warriors had not arrived to destroy him. They had arrived to judge him, and he had passed. The Apache warriors moved like a shifting river across the desert floor, silent and disciplined. Jacob watched until their silhouettes blurred into the horizon, the two sisters riding safely among them. Only when the sound of hooves faded entirely did he let out the breath he'd been holding. But peace didn't settle on him. Something gnawed at his chest. The older sister's final words before leaving echoed in his ears. They took our mother. They took our brother. Jacob couldn't simply return to ranch life, knowing killers were roaming close, tearing families apart and burning whatever stood in their path. He wasn't a lawman or a soldier, but he had seen enough of the frontier to know one truth sometimes. The difference between good men and evil men was whether someone decided to stand up. He saddled his bay gelding bandit and strapped his rifles to the saddle horn. The desert sun had fully risen, throwing long shadows toward the east, the same direction the war party had gone. He followed them not to interfere, but because justice called out like a cry on the wind. The trail grew more visible with every mile, hoofprints scattered around the scrub, scraps of torn cloth snagged on mesquite branches. And once Jacob's jaw clenched at the sitta-charred cooking pot lying next to the burnt remains of a small fire. Beside it were tiny hoofprints, lighter than those of Apache ponies, the Coyotero renegades. Jacob pressed on, the desert heat wrapping around him like a tightening vice. Hours passed. Sweat rolled down his neck and soaked his shirt, but he urged Bandit onward. The land around him shifted from sandy flats to rocky ridges, where the wind howled between stone towers like voices whispering warnings. By noon, he spotted the war party. They had dismounted at the base of a ridgeline, their ponies tied near a shallow creek. The two sisters sat under the shade of a cottonwood tree, watched over by a pair of warriors. The rest of the group had gathered around the chief, who knelt over something on the ground. Jacob rode closer, slowly, respectfully. The chief didn't look surprised to see him. "You follow," he said simply. Jacob nodded. "If you'll have me." The chief pointed at the dirt. "Then see." Jacob dismounted and stepped closer. It was a footprint, small, barefoot, a child's. The chief's jaw tightened. Her brother. Jacob felt his stomach knot. The Apache leader stood, eyes burning with controlled fury. "Coyotero, take him. Maybe alive, maybe not, but we follow. Until we find." Jacob swallowed. "I'm with you." The chief studied him for a long, quiet moment. "You ride with Apache warriors on Apache trail. Few white men come back." A flicker of a smile touched Jacob's face. "Then I'll be one of the few." The chief grunted a sound, close to approval. The warriors remounted. Jacob swung into his saddle and took his place beside them. For the first time, he rode not as an outsider, but as one of their own. The trail grew darker as they ascended the ridgeline. The land turned harsh and twisted, littered with blackened stumps and coyote bones. A foul smell drifted on the wind-smoke sweat, and something far worse. They crested the ridge and saw it, a camp, the Coyotero renegades, dozens and dozens of tents, painted with crude symbols, horses tethered in uneven lines, men drinking, shouting, sharpening blades. The air was thick with chaos. 3 warriors dragged a woman from one of the tents. Her wrists bound. The older Apache sister gasped, "Mother." A cold silence fell across the ridge. Jacob's hand tightened on his rifle. The chief's voice was low but thunderous. "Tonight," he said, "we end this." The desert wind shifted, carrying the promise of violence. Jacob had ridden to help. Now he realized he had ridden into a war. Night fell over the desert like a black velvet curtain, and Jacob Rourke crouched beside the Apache war chief on the ridgeline. staring down at the Coyotero camp, where fires cast twisted shadows over tents and sleeping horses, the air thick with the scent of smoke and sweat, knowing that by dawn the stolen families might be gone forever. The chief pointed toward the far edge, where 3 drunken guards sat carelessly around a fire, and in a silent signal 2 Apache warriors slipped from the darkness, dispatching the men with deadly precision, their knives flashing and gasps muffled until the bodies were still, and Jacob, heart pounding, crept forward to cut the ropes binding the girl's younger brother and their mother. The boy's eyes wide with terror before recognition softened his expression, and the mother's gaze met Jacob's with fierce gratitude, whispering words of thanks as the chief motioned them to move. But before they could retreat, a renegade noticed movement, shouting an alarm that shattered the night, and suddenly the desert erupted with the thunder of hooves, screams, arrows whistling through the air, and rifles cracking as the Apache war party surged like a storm through the camp, cutting down the disorganized men with terrifying skill, while Jacob pushed the boy and mother behind a boulder, firing carefully at anyone who threatened them, until a massive renegade broke through with a hatchet, charging at Jacob, who grabbed a burning log from a nearby fire and swung with desperate force, sending the man screaming to the ground. And as the battle raged, the night filled with the sounds of fury, fire, and vengeance, but gradually the cries and gunfire faded, leaving the desert silent save for the crackling of dying embers and the whispered prayers of the rescued family. Jacob, standing among the warriors, breathing heavily, covered in dust and sweat, watching the defeated Coyotero lie motionless under the rising moon, realizing that the girls, their mother and brother, were safe, and that in this violent, lawless land, courage and honor had triumphed against the odds, the war chief nodding once at Jacob in acknowledgement. A silent pact of respect between a man who had risked everything and a people bound by blood and survival. And as the first light of dawn brushed the desert ridges with gold, Jacob felt the weight of exhaustion, relief, and something more profound, the understanding that true heroism often came not from the rifle alone, but from the heart that dared to stand firm when chaos threatened to sweep all away.